Alright, so I just wanted to take a minute and just sort of ramble a little bit. I guess that's kind of what I've been doing here. Still figuring out this whole video making process. And also I finally figured out some other stuff. Got an avatar together. So that's cool. I'm figuring out a few new tricks as we go here. Unfortunately, there's no like handbook on how to create a video in this style, I guess. And I just wanted to take a minute and talk about all the problems sort of plaguing the Democratic Party right now. And why I personally think that the party in general needs to die. Which I know, ironic, that my avatar is Andrew Jackson, the guy who founded the party. Otherwise, pretty cool guy, but yeah, the party's nothing like when he founded it. Moving forward. So I got some notes here, I guess. I know, I'm... Anyhow. So first, let's start out with socialism, I guess. So from an economic standpoint, we all know socialism never works. It's a bad idea. Not much more to be said there. And that's my problem with the Democratic Party. They're just full of bad ideas. Because I started thinking, if I could take this out of the Democratic Party, if I could take that out of the Democratic Party, well, there really wouldn't be much party left because of how many issues I have with it. You know, it's kind of like an AT-AT in Empire Strikes Back. I was thinking about that a little earlier. With an AT-AT, for example, like its main weakness was those huge legs of it. And yeah, you could get rid of the legs and replace them with wheels or some shit. But at that point, it's not really an AT-AT anymore. Same thing with the Democratic Party on the whole. You know, if you were to take out everything wrong with the Democratic Party, it wouldn't exist because literally everything's wrong with it. Well, every major thing wrong with it. I mean, there's some minor stuff in there that's slightly on the track of right, but truth be told, there are just too many problems. You know? And I know I'm saying you know and blah 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 a lot. Oh god. So with regards to socialism, never worked, never has, never will. Nobody likes it, and yet they still continue to push for it. And I guess that's another thing that they were mentioning on that live stream. Maybe I'll link it. Was there's this great big like hegemony in the Democratic Party too. There doesn't seem to be much criticism coming from within. All of them just kind of suck it up and deal with it. You don't really see these like Tea Party branch offs and such. Yeah, that doesn't really happen. And the one time it did in recent history, the Justice Democrats, it was dead on the water. Let's be honest here. It was straight dead in the water. On such a fundamental level. And the reason being that they were trying to deal with one problem of the Democratic Party. But the other two just sort of seeped their way in and corrupted it, really. Because truth be told, in spite of the fact that everything's wrong with the Democratic Party, all the other minutiae of what's wrong with it tend to hold it together. Because, like for example, the corporatists, which is another huge problem in the Democratic Party. In my opinion, they keep the party from getting too radicalized and just becoming Antifa. And that's another thing, like Kyle Kalinske, for example. He was all like, oh, the party needs to quit being center left and yada yada yada. And, we gotta go full socialism. We gotta go even further left than Bernie Sanders. We gotta do single payer, even though single payer is shit. You know, and meanwhile, there are freaking Antifa dudes running around. It doesn't get much further left than anarcho-communists. I'm sorry, but it's true. Like, you want to try to go further left than that. Come on, man. Come on. Like, really. And then you have, as I was saying earlier, the corporatists. I really don't feel like I need to go into much detail with that. Corporatism, not good. And that's another thing too. Like the Democrats, or the Democratic Party, sits around and blames our failing economic model on capitalism, and that's another thing I freaking hate. Not capitalism. Capitalism's great, but shoot. All right, but anyway, like they always insist it's capitalism when it's not. Capitalism is just the voluntary exchange of goods and services and such. It just doesn't seem to be happening in my opinion. What we have by that definition isn't capitalism. If anything, we have more of a corporatist sort of thing, as I was saying earlier. And the Democrats who sit around and advocate for socialism, well, they're really only giving more power to these guys. Because for whatever reason, socialism and communism, despite the fact that it was designed to be this sort of revolt for the people, it gives a select few amount of people power. It's very bizarre. Communism and socialism requires so much power to be given into the state that it's ridiculous. And the state just goes corrupt into this dictatorial mode. And every time it just... That's why it doesn't work. Oh, God. And I guess that's another segue here. We got useful idiots. You know, a lot of just generally stupid people seem to be head over heels in love with the Democratic Party. You know? And that, in my opinion, is really why the likes of Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. It's because she kept getting all these city folk, I guess. I know, I'm so country. All these city folk living in the inner cities, all these thug life gangsta types who sit around shouting Black Lives Matter and such. Well, you know what? It was a justified shooting. It was perfectly justified what that cop in that particular instance that started that whole movement did. That whole Ferguson incident, yeah, it was justified. I don't even feel like I have to say anything on that, because at this point it's just been refuted so much. And it's really bizarre because the socialists and then the progressives and then the corporatists all sort of suck it up and sort of coalesce into this hate fuck orgy that is the Democratic Party. And they really have lost their way. Because, I mean, if the Democratic Party was way back when our boy Andrew here founded it, then we wouldn't really be in this situation. Not for 1 second. And it's just really freaking bizarre. And I'll tell you how the Democratic Party got there. They started out as this working man party. And then they continued to be that up until recently. And in my opinion, it's really quite simple. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, because at that point, the Democratic Party was on a winning streak that was broken up by Reagan, and then we got Bush, who was an idiot, and then that sort of swayed everything back in. But yeah, for a long time, the Democratic Party was just dominating. Up until, like, just now, actually. And that's another thing. The candidates they run. Just these awful, super stuck-up types. It's ridiculous. Oh, I know I'm saying that a lot. But trust me, it's true. Like, because don't get me wrong, we could have gotten worse than Obama. Well, we almost did. Hillary was pretty bad. But when you ran Hillary, that was like rock bottom. And they started having this weird mentality. Like, you almost got this sense that for Hillary Clinton, it was all like, oh, now it's my turn. That was her whole attitude throughout the thing. And nothing says arrogance quite like that. Like, oh, it's owed to us. We're Democrats. We're guaranteed to win. Come on. Give me that freaking position. Give me that. And that's an attitude that seems to seep all the way down, straight into its base. The Radfem SJWs. That's what they're like. They're entitled. And it's ridiculous. And I guess that brings us to our next thing, SJWs. Progressives and identitarians and all that. For whatever reason, these people, they get together, and I still don't understand it. Like, why the likes of Steve Shives, for example, sit around and take all this just abuse. So I was watching one of the older Steve Shive videos, I guess. Or rather, a video someone did on him. And it was just ridiculous. Like, there was just so much self-hate coming out of that guy's mouth. You know, and it's not just him. It's like John McIntosh. Oh, God, remember him? And all these, like, self-hating guys, these white knight cucks. And it's just all like, why are you doing this? You're so freaking emasculated. Have you no self-respect? And the answer is they don't. They don't have any self-respect, which makes them, in my opinion, exceptionally dangerous. Because if you don't have self-respect on some level, some form of dignity, you'll go to the lowest lows. You will do the most desperate and depraved shit. And I've seen it, believe me. I've seen people with absolutely no self-esteem do terrible things. And that's what they are. They're people with no self-esteem or sense of self, and yet are super entitled at the same time. Well, I guess it's mostly the females who are entitled in those groups, because these SJW feminist circles are quite matriarchal. But trying to think here, sorry. I don't know why, but whenever I try to like actually, because when I'm just all by myself ranting, things are different. But now I got a screen in front of me. Oh God. Well, c'est la vie. That's the way it is. So yeah, they're all just these stuck-up people. And that's another thing, they're unlikable. Alright, and I guess moving back to some of the other core issues I had was, well, let's see, I mentioned socialism and coreism. But yeah, they get all in this hate fuck orgy. I know I said that already. I think I like that. I think I'm gonna use that. Hate fuck orgy. But yeah, and it's like, why should I vote for you if you wouldn't vote for you? Because truth be told, that's how low they think of themselves, the male feminists. Like, I look at Justin Trudeau and I think, if a woman was running against him, would he vote for himself over her? And the answer is no, because he's such a white knight. And that's really where it is. There's just so much self-loathing. And you don't have to like yourself, but just at least respect yourself. Like me, I absolutely hate myself. I'm a terrible person. But all that aside, there are still things that I'll say, heck no, I'm not doing that. There's a difference between liking and respecting. And believe me, there are very few people in this world I respect. But I always make sure one of them is me. And that's really for the good of everyone around me for the most part. It's not by virtue of, oh, look at me, I'm so awesome. Because that's narcissism. But it's more like, no, I won't do this because I have standards. And that's what makes them even worse. They're desperate. And they're depraved. They're like starving wolves being cornered by a bunch of huntsmen. And you know what? Speaking of some ye old stuff, let's actually talk about the early days of the Democratic Party. And I guess where they've gone wrong. They used to be this super proletariat man of the people. As a matter of fact, the reason they chose the donkey was not only because Andrew Jackson was a stubborn jackass, but also because, the donkey was something that was used a lot by farmers to, plow and such. So it was this reliable thing. And they, like, when was the last time you heard a Democrat reach out to farmers? Like, when was the last time that was a Democrat thing? Remember that? I sure as hell don't. I'm not fucking old enough. But, and I guess, in this sense, the Republicans have them outclassed, because in this respect, you're more pro the working man. And I guess another instance in which they do that is with our military. You have all these, hippies, because that's what they are. They're hippies. Sitting around, talking about, oh, we shouldn't be doing this, we shouldn't be doing that. Shouldn't be getting involved in all these wars. Our soldiers are the bad guys, yada yada yada. Well, don't blame it on the soldiers. They don't want to be there as much as you don't want them there. I remember, my grandfather, he was telling me about how he got drafted in Vietnam when he was younger. And they spat on the face of those vets and called them baby killers. And they still sort of do that today, except to a lesser extent. Like, I remember that one speech where Donald Trump honored that widowed orphan or whatever. Well, no, not widowed orphan, but a widow who lost her husband in the war. He was all like, yeah, she's awesome. Props to you, I guess. And some of them refuse to stand. And it's just, come on, basic common courtesy. Do you not even know that? You're like that hateful of Trump and narcissistic at the same time. And fucking stupid, as I mentioned previously. And downright blind enough. And then some of them went and had the audacity and said, oh, it was a trap, it was a political thing. That's why he did this. Well, you know what? If it was, you fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Plain and simple. You fell for it hook, line, and sinker. And I guess another aspect I didn't address much was the identity politics bit. There are, Hispanics for Trump, Latinos for Trump, African Americans for Trump, all that goodness. And it's just been getting bigger and bigger, the minority support for Trump. The Democratic Party has just been bleeding voters of every different race. So that shows how well that whole appealing to minorities thing has been working out. The answer is it hasn't. And you shouldn't be. Why appeal to one select group of people when you can appeal to everyone? I mean, that's what the Republicans are doing. I mean, when was the last time you heard someone like Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio pander to freaking white supremacists? The answer is never. And yet these Democrats, they do that with Black Lives Matter, which is basically a new Black Panther Party. They do it all the time. You don't see the Republicans pander to males, and yet the Democrats pander to females all the time. That's what the whole point was with Hillary's election. It was this identity politics thing. It was all like, oh, it's going to be this historic, beautiful moment. We're going to have the first woman president of America. Well, you know what? Nobody gives a shit if you are not going to actually address their issues instead of making everything about you. Alright, you gotta have self-respect, but you can't be a narcissist, as I've stated previously. And that's what that was. Like, it would be one thing if Hillary was all like, I can do this, and, had that self-esteem, rather than being like, oh, I'm the best, look at me. Because that's narcissism. There's a difference in believing yourself and believing you're the next thing since sliced bread. And that's really what took her over. There's another group of people they forgot about was factory workers. She didn't go to Michigan. She didn't go here or there, and that sends a clear message. Democratic Party doesn't give a shit about the working man. They became the bourgeoisie party on the whole. And they did this, in my opinion, not long after they got Obama in. At least the GOP criticizes itself. Well, not itself, but its base does. Because truth be told, I think if it were the Libertarian Party that was in power instead of the GOP, a lot of these guys would be going to their place of residence. Because the Libertarian Party is essentially superior in every regard. And yet the GOP is still one of the bigger dudes. And the reason for that is because A, third parties can't win in America, and B, because a lot of these dudes who, again, would rather go over there but don't, they actually try to improve. When they have a grievance, they actually go and attack rather than sucking it up and voting for freaking Jeb. And I guess I keep attacking this a lot. They do have a habit of just this unholy alliance. Between all these groups. Because again, with Justice Democrats, yeah, they were trying to get rid of the corporatists. And yeah, the corporatists are terrible. But at the same time, so are the SJWs. See, if you try to get rid of one of them, the other still seeps in, and then your criticism is just whap. It's like a wet paper towel. That's not gonna get any liquids off because it's already soaked damp. And we really do need the Democratic Party to just go away at this point. Because let's be honest, what self-respecting man would vote for them? What self-respecting anyone would vote for them, really? What self-respecting blank would vote for them over the Republicans, who don't go after and constantly attack Whitey, I guess, who don't constantly attack the males? They don't do that. Why? Because it doesn't fucking help. And truth be told, I'm not a Democrat. I mean, granted, I'm using my boy Andrew here, but make no mistake, I think if he were born in today's world, he'd be a diehard Republican. And no, not because he was a plantation owner and yada yada yada. It's because he's just this proletariat guy who fought against the banks, who fought against corporations and such. And while granted, the GOP also has a corporatist problem, at least it doesn't also have an SJW problem. I mean, seriously, the closest equivalent is the alt-right, and even then, the alt-right isn't very powerful. Nobody takes the skinheads seriously. Nobody ever will take the skinheads seriously. And it's pretty safe to say that, because, like, seriously, who would? Besides another skinhead, and they're this fringe minority. And make no mistake, you're actually seeing this huge reformation in the form of the new right, which doesn't get much coverage. But it is happening. You are seeing, with Generation Z, for example, a much more pro-science conservative party. A much more anti-corporate conservative party. I mean, it's still very free market and deregulation stuff. However, the motivation is different, because in this case, it's because they genuinely believe that that will help. And I do believe deregulating is the way to go. And the reason being is because at least that puts everybody on equal footing. Because the problem with regulations is they apply to small businesses as well as these large corporations. And truth be told, in a genuine free market, these large-scale corporations wouldn't exist because there'd just be so much local competition. I mean, granted, they'd be all over the place, but I don't think they'd be doing so well to the point where they are at now. And I guess that brings me to my next point. They're apologists. If you have to be an apologist for something, that means you're on the wrong side. In my opinion. If you have to be an apologist for Islam and terrorism, you're on the wrong side, plain and simple. If you have to say, the moment some sort of atrocity hits, not because it's necessarily wrong, because yeah, we know not all, but so much as a way to sort of obfuscate. When freaking Austrian Prime Minister What's-His-Face says, oh, we have to make non-Muslims wear the hijab out of solidarity and end freaking Islamophobia. While meanwhile, you have people fucking dying. Like, let's be real. Who gives a shit about Islamophobia when people are suffering and dying? Doesn't one of those issues take priority over the other? Like, let's be real, if someone's being nasty, yeah, that's not necessarily good, but so what? So what if someone's a little nasty towards someone who's a little different? People are allowed to be assholes. Alright? People are allowed to be racists. And I know racism is horrible and all that, but they are allowed to be. They are allowed to hold opinions which people might not necessarily think is right. And that's another thing the left has to deal with, or rather the Democrat Party. They need to learn to get out of an echo chamber. Because that's what they're in right now. They're in this huge echo chamber. You know? And it's ridiculous because they point to these, like, guys who are supposedly outright like Paul Joseph Watson, and they say, oh, he's this horrible racist. Well, no, he's not. You just think that because you're living in a bubble and you haven't actually watched one of his things. I was once having this, like, conversation with some people over Facebook, and they were all like, Milo Yiannopoulos is horrible, and he's wrong, and this and that. And I was like, well, tell you what. Name one of his views that are wrong. If he's such a horrible person, that should be easy, right? Then proceeded to say, like, all of them. And I was like, no. Give me one specific example. See, because you don't even watch the guy. You don't know what he's fucking saying. Because you're an idiot. Because you don't know what you're talking about. And that's another thing. For whatever reason, the Democratic Party, like the one thing every single one of those corporatists, communists, and SJWs all share, is that they don't know fuck all about anything. And it's really bizarre. SJWs are wrong when they say this and that and that and this. I could go down the list. The wage gap. See, I can name specific examples. Wage gap, patriarchy, yada yada yada. Not enough women in STEM, even though yada yada. Communists. We gotta seize the means of production and give it to the people. Well, technically, it's already in the hands of the people. And if anything, you're taking it away from them and giving it to the government. Because that's what socialism is. Almost said communism for a sec there. Minutia. It's a thing. Unfortunately, communism, the only difference between it and socialism is the dissolving of the government afterwards, which never happens. But, and the reason I say, well, it's already in the hands of the people is private industry is the people. By definition, anyone can go out and start their own business. Any average Joe Schmo can go out and run a tchotchke shop. Yeah, see, I'm not necessarily just Southern. I got some New York blood in me. Try me. You know, you can sell your little tchotchkes. Your little useless knickknacks. See, anyone can go out and do that. They can, like Steve Jobs, he freaking... Like, see, how is our businesses not already in the hands of the people? Yeah, large-scale corporations are their own thing, but any guy can start from the ground up. And you're taking that away from people. So if anything, you're taking that away from people. Whatevs. Communism on a fundamental level has no internal logic. Because see, in capitalism, getting rid of the government would kind of be like getting rid of an appendix. Well, maybe not an appendix, but maybe like a gallbladder or some shit. Maybe a pancreas. I mean, you won't die. And it does have some slight effects, but all in all, the system itself keeps working. But then you have communists. Like, when you get your anarchist communist state, how do you intend to continue the redistribution of wealth afterwards? Because once you've done that, once you've gotten rid of government, which keeps taking people's money and enforcing communist law, what's going to stop people from just creating their own businesses and then boom, you're back to capitalism? Makes no fucking sense. And I know I just went on a side tangent about why communism doesn't work. Right, and then you have the corporatists who sit around and try to manipulate the system in their best interests because they can. And again, in a true capitalist system, that they wouldn't be able to do that because government would... See, in my opinion, this is one of the advantages ANCAPs or Ancapistan would have over our current society, is that there wouldn't be any corruption, I guess, as well as lobbyism. But if we could get a government without lobbyism, that'd be great. So in that extremely unlikely but ideal system, where you have free market capitalism but a government without lobbyism, how far would these corporations get? Not at all. Which is why lobbyism is a thing, unfortunately. That's just a reality we're going to have to deal with for now. Keyword for now. However, that doesn't mean that the corporatists shouldn't be fought back against. I mean, just look at Brexit, for example. That effed up the corporatists. Because they all wanted them to stay in the EU. All these globalists like Soros, yeah. Because for whatever reason, corporatists have a habit of profiting off of other people's pain and misery. It's bizarre. And it's weird as well because for whatever reason the SJWs and such keep backing the corporate candidates. And yet, see, and again, they suck it up. The socialists didn't get their socialist candidate, Bernie Sanders. And the SJWs, they didn't get their SJW candidate, which I guess would have been Jill Stein or some shit. So they all just sort of sucked it up and voted Hillary. You know, it's like, so long as you pander to the SJWs on some basic level, you have your support. You have their support. Unless you don't, like with the Pepsi commercial for some bizarre reason. Like, see, that's the weird thing about social justice in general. Its internal logic doesn't work. Like, you have constant double standards and such in its very internal logic. And while granted, you know, the average person who knows enough about social justice can kind of say, yeah, they wouldn't take kindly to this or to that. But yet they take kindly to different things. And it's really on this case-by-case basis you have to take it on. Because there will be cases where they're complaining about this, but then, like for example, you have the slut walks, and yet at the same time you have freaking at the Women's March all these hijabs and such. And it's all like, well, god damn it, those things are two polar opposites. The point of the hijab is to cover people up and to be religious and conservative and shit. Well, not by America standards, more by Saudi standards. Conservatism is a very relative thing. Maybe I'll talk about that in another video. You know, and it really is bizarre. Because the SJWs will support Hillary and call Bernie Sanders a freaking sexist. Even though he's basically super SJW. But then that's, I guess, where the identity politics creep in. Though truth be told, I think Trump timeline is best timeline. Although Rand Paul would have been nice. But come on, when is that happening? Let's be real here. We don't have that much freedom. Voting doesn't make that much of a difference. Rand Paul would be glorious. It's a shame our society is ruled by lizard people. Lizard people is a metaphor, by the way, for like super out of touch global elites, like George Soros. Oh, I don't know where this was going, to be honest. I feel like I addressed all of my points way faster than I expected. Let's see, I mentioned Justice Democrats being dead in the water. I mentioned this, I mentioned that. And see, like, if you were to take away all these parts, Like, stay with me here. Imagine the Democratic Party is like a tree. And imagine that we had an axe, right? Now, all these issues are like parts of the trunk. Think of it that way. So we swing at that, we chop off freaking corporatism, right? Then we chop off social justice, and then we chop off this and that. And then the whole tree just falls apart. Because that's literally all the Democratic Party right there. I mean, can you really argue that it's at least pro-science when it's sitting around spouting that there are more than two genders? And that's another thing. We don't have a pro-science party. Here in America, at least. Like, you have one that's not pro-science here, and then one that's not pro-science there. Really all depends on just minutia. So yeah, I don't quite know where I was going with this. I just felt the need to rant. I don't know, let's try to make this productive. I don't know how long I've been ranting here, but let's try to end on a high note. Alright, so let's say the Democratic Party is burned down and destroyed. What would I like to see it replaced with? Well, first off, ideally, I would like to see the Libertarian Party take hold in America at least. But let's suppose that isn't the case. Let's suppose it's going to be a liberal party that replaces the Democrats. What sort of substance would they have to them? Assuming they weren't communist and all that stuff. Well, first off, one of the few things I actually disagree with other libertarians with is protectionism. Other than protectionism and borders, I am, for the most part, 100% libertarian. Because, like, I can prove objectively that we're better off with these things. Because, like, with protectionism, for example, think of each country as playing a game of whatever, right? And think of our local laws being the rules. You have different countries basically playing the same game with different rules, and in some instances those rules are so different that they may as well be playing different games altogether. I mean, seriously, just imagine if, like, child labor was illegal worldwide. Well, within reason, I suppose. In some cases, child labor is okay. Like, I don't know, a kid running a paper route. Or a 16-year-old flipping burgers. I'm okay with that. But not any of this coal mine bullshit. Ah, yes. Moving forward. So anyway, until that happens, until we get, for the most part, universal laws rule worldwide, because otherwise, I'd probably be in favor of open borders and such, if all the laws worked the same consistently throughout the world, but they don't. You know, because then we wouldn't have to worry about criminals coming into our country, because they'd all be in jail in their own respective country, because whatever law they broke over there would be illegal here. and yada yada yada. And I feel like that's the one flaw in libertarianism. It kind of assumes that for the most part everybody, in terms of the law, is on equal footing. But I guess that's what the anarchism half of ANCAPism is for. That way you can just kind of make that assumption that everywhere is equal footing on in terms of laws. But how would an ANCAP country deal with other nations that aren't ANCAP? I know I'm getting off on this tangent, but let's follow it real quick. Yeah, I have no fucking clue. I guess the idea is for the whole world to go ANCAP at once. I don't see that working out. Like, if the whole world was just America, maybe ANCAPism could work. But unfortunately, we got some of the lives in the world. But anyway, back to protectionism. Like, for example, free trade deals work out pretty well for America when it's between, like, us and Britain, for example. But with, like, TPP and NAFTA, for example, because they threw in these third world countries, all our jobs went straight there. Like, that's kind of a fact at this point. I mean, granted, we got back new jobs involving computers and shit, but not everybody's gonna know or have the skills to do those jobs. Alright? And that's one of the things I disagree with most conservatives on. The idea that it'll all work out anyway because we'll get new jobs. Well, no. Just stick with the old. I mean, don't get me wrong. Get new jobs. But we shouldn't be plotting to throw people out of work in an effort to get new jobs that they won't be able to freaking do. Because, I mean, yeah, all our factories are shut down here in America. And that's thrown a lot of people out of jobs. But when you have a bunch of new jobs in computing, that doesn't really matter. I hate to break it to you, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You gotta keep those factories around and phase them out naturally, I guess. Is the idea. Then there's the omnipresent threat of automation. Shit. And that's a whole separate issue, but oh god. So yeah, and it's really bizarre just watching this unholy alliance between all these groups and just there being no criticism in the Democratic Party. Because, I mean, do you think people like to go back to Steve Shives? Do you think they take criticism? No, they block people. You know, I was talking with this guy who I hadn't seen in a while. And eventually the whole thing drifted to politics, and the dude freaking blocked me, and I'm like, really? After all we've been through? I know. Side tangent. Jeez. So yeah, I really haven't much more to say here. I mean, I guess I should probably get back on the track of this, I guess, new liberal party. Well, let's see. So first off, we would get rid of communism and all that and replace it with maybe some slightly more protectionist policy on an international scale anyway. I don't believe that protectionism should be applied on the national scale, only the international/global scale. Because, like, in America here, for the most part, all our laws are relatively consistent. I mean, granted, certain things have like different laws and yada yada minutia. But for the most part, we're playing by the same rules, so we don't really have to worry about protectionism on that smallest scale. If we were going by the Articles of Confederation, maybe, but no, we don't have to worry about. See, free trade can work on that national level, just complete no regulations there. But once you get into the international front, everything changes. Everything. And let's see, what else? I would try to make them more pro-science. That's another thing. So they'd be free market except on the issue of protectionism. They wouldn't be open border. Because those are the only two things I disagree with the libertarians on. Let's see, we'd make them more pro-science. Like we would make it explicitly so. There'd be none of this three genders bullshit. Let's see, so already we have the makings of a vastly better Democratic Party. See, because we start by adopting pretty much all the libertarian positions and then just save a few. And that's another thing, pragmatism. The current Democratic Party has none of it. Like, there is no such thing as pragmatism in the Democratic Party. They're this utopianist bunch. And we'd get rid of that too. We'd start from a pragmatic point of view. I guess would be the idea. Let's see, what else? Let's see. Well, first off, we would completely change the stance on military spending. And the reason I say that is because I feel like most Democrats don't really understand how the international sphere works. Because first off, you can't just pull out of every nation that we have a base in where there's nothing going on. And the reason being is because they want us there. Like, look at Poland, for example. Do you think Poland would want us to just pull out and leave them alone? God, no, because then the Russians would just take over. Or maybe the Germans, who knows? Angela Merkel's basically worse than Hitler, so... Ah, God. And that's another thing. Yeah, we're number one out of all the countries in the world when it comes to military spending, but seeing as number two is fucking China. I mean, do you really want China to be the world hegemon? And that's another thing that I guess I disagree with most libertarians on. And again, otherwise, I'm pretty much wholly libertarian. It's this idea that we should not be the world police. You know? Because if we aren't, who the fuck else is gonna be? It would be China. I don't want to see a world ruled by China. It's literally just, we are the only thing standing in their way. I mean, look at the Spratly Islands. Look at what's going on over there. So we'd get rid of this, not necessarily anti-war, but anti-cooperating with foreign nations thing going. Because they're just anti-military spending on like such a huge fundamental level. Even though I would argue that's something you actually need to spend on a little bit at least. If you need to spend it, you should be. And that's another thing. I'd get rid of all this social program talk. The welfare state, it don't work. Or at least not in its current form. I mean, don't get me wrong. I could probably elaborate on what changes I would make to the welfare state to make it work. But I doubt those are going to happen. Like, when it comes to welfare, you could, for example, say, alright, you have to be looking for a job, and you have to prove it in order to get that welfare check. And once you got a job, we'll wean you off it. And also, I'd cut off that whole bonus money for kids thing at like 2 or 3. That way we don't have people doing like 5, 6, 7 kids. And that's another thing, if you go like over that. Because what they'll do is they'll keep having kids once they get older. So even that wouldn't fix that. So I'd maybe also change it a little bit there. As to, alright, you've had that one kid, he got older. You have that second kid, he got older. You can't have another kid and do that same thing again after that. Let's see. What else? Oh, I would make sure a certain amount of money there would be spent on the kids. Rather than it all just going to the person having the kids. No, a certain amount would have to be spent on those children. Like a certain percentage anyway. Let's see, what else would I change about the welfare state? Oh yeah, once you got a job, it would wean you off rather than just cutting you cold turkey. And another thing also, I would have it give you less money to begin with. Because, like, what can you afford with welfare? Right now. Anyone here on welfare who's watching this, or anyone who can do the math, feel free to post some stuff. Because the question is, like, a lot of people sit around and go, oh, below the poverty line, yada yada yada, and living wage. Well, how much do you need in order to be considered living, I guess? Or rather, living in a decent place. Because, like, 90% of people who live below the poverty line have a freaking refrigerator. Oh, God. You have a refrigerator and all these appliances and such. And that's a testament to capitalism, but dear goodness. Because, like, how much would you have to... Because then, alright, let's say someone says, oh, but a computer is completely necessary. No, it isn't. Don't get me wrong, a computer is a very useful device. Like, how much spending money does a person need to be having enough of? And what would be considered necessities? In my opinion, maybe food, water, and shelter, and that's about it. You want to spend on anything else, that's not my problem. See, welfare shouldn't be enough to afford more than that. More than a basic meal. Maybe like a tiny apartment or a tiny house. And maybe just a couple of lights. Or rather enough to light the house, yeah. Yeah, nothing but the bare necessities, I guess. Yeah, I know this rant is getting long, but... oh, God. You know what, I'm just gonna end it here.